The morning sun had barely crested the Hindu Kush when Gunnery Sergeant Nkechi Adiz stepped off the Black Hawk at Forward Operating Base Chapman. Dust swirled around her boots as she shouldered her rifle case, the familiar weight settling against her back like an old friend. She had been flown in from Camp Leatherneck specifically for this operation, her reputation preceding her through channels that mattered to people who understood what her service record actually meant. The SEAL team was already gathered near the Tactical Operations Center, 7 men checking gear and trading the kind of dark humor that soldiers use to mask pre-mission tension. Senior Chief Petty Officer Brennan Holt stood at the center, his thick arms crossed over his chest as he watched her approach. Even from 50 meters away, Nkechi could read his expression. She had seen it countless times before on countless faces. The dismissal, the doubt, the unspoken question of what a woman was doing in his world. Before we dive deeper into this mission, drop a comment and let us know what state or country you're watching from. Maybe you know someone who has served and faced similar disrespect despite their qualifications. Holt did not wait for her to reach the group before speaking. His voice carried across the gravel lot with deliberate volume. "Well, gentlemen," he announced, "looks like Command decided we need a babysitter for this one. A Marine babysitter at that." Laughter rippled through most of the team. Petty Officer First Class Declan Murdoch was the loudest, his sharp features twisted into a smirk. "Maybe she can make coffee while we work," he added. "I hear Marines are good at that." Nkechi reached the group and set down her rifle case. She did not respond to the comments. She never did. In her 17 years of service, she had learned that words meant nothing and actions meant everything. Her 2 silver stars spoke louder than any response she could offer, though she knew these men either had not read her file or had chosen to dismiss it. "Gunnery Sergeant Adiz reporting as ordered," she said simply, addressing the space between Holt and the tactical building. Her voice was calm, measured, carrying the slight Houston accent that had survived her years in service. Holt looked her up and down like she was a piece of equipment he had not requested and did not want. 5'6", 130 pounds if she was soaking wet. Nothing about her physical presence suggested the lethal precision she carried inside her. That was always the way. People saw what they expected to see. The door to the operations center opened and Lieutenant Commander Rosalind Vance emerged, her silver oak leaves catching the morning light. She was the mission commander, a veteran intelligence officer who had specifically requested Nkechi for Overwatch support over Holt's formal objections. "Good," Vance said, her sharp eyes moving across the assembled team. "Everyone is here. Inside. Now." The briefing room was cramped and smelled of stale coffee and nervous sweat. Maps covered every wall. Satellite imagery spread across the central table. Vance walked them through the operation with clinical precision. A high-value informant in a village called Darwan, deep in the Khyber province. Hostile territory controlled by a network of insurgent cells. The informant had intelligence on planned attacks against coalition forces, information that could save dozens of lives if extracted successfully. "Sergeant Adiz will provide overwatch from this ridge," Vance said, tapping a position on the topographical map. "Elevated sight lines covering your approach and extraction route. She will be your eyes in the sky." Holt shifted his weight, his jaw tightening. "With respect, Commander, my team does not need a guardian angel. We have operated in this province for 8 months without Marine support. We know the terrain." Vance fixed him with a stare that had ended arguments with men far more senior than Brennan Holt. "Your objection is noted and overruled, Senior Chief." Sergeant Adiz holds the 3rd highest confirmed engagement count in the entire Marine Scout sniper community. Her thermal and low visibility certifications exceed anyone currently stationed at this FOB. "She is here because I want the best watching your backs, not because I'm interested in your opinions about who that should be." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Nkechi kept her expression neutral, though she filed away the moment. Vance had just made an enemy for her by speaking truth, and enemies in the field could be as dangerous as any insurgent. The briefing continued. Insertion by helicopter at 0400. Movement to the village under cover of darkness. Contact with the informant. Extraction before dawn. Simple on paper. Nothing was ever simple in the Hindu Kush. When the briefing ended, the team dispersed to finalize preparations. Nkechi found a quiet corner of the base to check her rifle, a customized M40A6 that she had carried through 3 deployments. Her hands moved with the automatic precision of 10,000 repetitions, fingers finding every component by memory alone. The scope, the bolt, the trigger assembly, each piece cleaned and verified and returned to its place. She was aware of Holt watching her from across the staging area, aware of Murdoch whispering something that made 2 other SEALs laugh, aware of the isolation that always surrounded her in moments like these, a bubble of doubt that others created, and she was expected to simply endure. Only one member of the team approached her. Petty Officer 2nd Class Yusuf Kadir was 26 years old, the youngest operator on the team, with intelligent eyes and a quiet demeanor that set him apart from the others. He stopped a respectful distance away and nodded toward her rifle. "That is a nice setup," he said. "Heard you qualified expert at 1,000 meters in crosswind conditions." Nkechi glanced up. 1,200, she corrected. But it was only a 15-knot crosswind. Nothing special. Kadir almost smiled. He understood something the others did not. He understood what it meant to prove yourself twice as hard for half the recognition. To have your faith or your face or your anatomy mark you as other before you ever opened your mouth. "Good luck out there," he said, and walked away before anyone could accuse him of fraternizing with the outsider. The fog was already building in the distant valleys as the sun climbed higher. Nkechi watched it roll between the peaks like something alive, something hungry. She had trained extensively in low-visibility conditions. She knew what the fog could hide and what it could reveal to someone with the right equipment and the right skills. Tonight, that fog would either save them or bury them. She finished checking her rifle and began loading magazines, each round seated with careful pressure. 17 years of service. 2 silver stars. Countless missions where she had been the difference between her team coming home and her team coming home in boxes. None of it mattered to men like Holt. None of it ever did. Until it did. The helicopters lifted off at 0400 exactly, twin Black Hawks cutting through the darkness with their running lights extinguished. Nkechi sat apart from the SEAL team, her rifle case secure between her knees, her eyes adjusting to the dim red glow of the cabin lighting. No one spoke to her during the flight. No one acknowledged her presence beyond the occasional glance that carried more suspicion than camaraderie. The insertion point was a narrow valley 12 kilometers from the target village. The pilots brought them in fast and low, hugging the terrain to avoid detection, then flared hard over a rocky clearing that barely accommodated both aircraft. The teams were on the ground in seconds, the helicopters already banking away into the pre-dawn blackness before the rotor wash had settled. Holt gathered his men with hand signals, the silence of the mountains pressing down around them. Nkechi moved to the designated rally point 20 meters from the main group, checking her GPS coordinates against the memorized map in her head. Her overwatch position was a ridge 3 kilometers to the northeast, a brutal climb in darkness, but one that would give her unobstructed sight lines over the village approach. She keyed her radio once to confirm communication. "Whisper actual, comms check." Holt's voice came back flat and uninterested. "Copy whisper. Try to keep up." She did not dignify the comment with a response. Instead, she began moving, her boots finding purchase on the loose shale as she ascended into the darkness. The SEALs would take the valley route, faster but more exposed. Her path was longer and steeper, but it was hers alone, and solitude had always been her closest companion in the field. The climb took 90 minutes. By the time Nkechi reached her position, the first gray light of dawn was bleeding over the eastern peaks. She settled into a natural depression between 2 boulders, her rifle assembled and mounted on its bipod within 60 seconds. The thermal scope powered on with a soft whine, painting the world below in shades of white and gray. The village of Darwan sprawled across the valley floor like a scattering of mud-colored dice. 60 structures, maybe 70, clustered around a central well and a mosque with a damaged minaret. Smoke rose from morning cooking fires. A few figures moved between buildings, early risers beginning the routines that defined life in these remote places. Whisper in position, she reported. Eyes on target village. No visible hostiles at this time. Copy Whisper. Holt's voice carried the barest edge of annoyance, as if her competent execution of duties was somehow an inconvenience. Main element moving to phase line alpha. Through her scope, Ketchy tracked the SEAL team's approach. They moved well, she had to admit. Whatever Holt's failings as a human being, he ran a tactically sound unit. The 7 operators flowed through the terrain like water, using every fold in the earth, every shadow, every piece of natural concealment. They reached the outskirts of the village just as full dawn broke over the mountains. Then she saw it. Movement in the tree line to the west. 3 figures, maybe 4, positioned where they had no reason to be. Villagers did not lurk in forests at dawn. Villagers worked their fields, tended their animals, prepared their meals. These figures were watching, waiting. Whisper to main element, she said, keeping her voice level. Possible hostile observation, western tree line, 200 meters from your position. 3 to 4 personnel, static. The radio was silent for a long moment. Then Murdoch's voice cut through, dripping with condescension. Whisper, those are probably goat herders. Maybe farmers. Not everyone with a beard is Taliban. You want us to abort because some locals are taking a morning walk. Ketchy felt her jaw tighten, but kept her tone professional. Negative. Body positioning is inconsistent with civilian activity. They are observing your approach vector. Recommend caution. Another pause. Then Holt. Noted Whisper. We are continuing mission. Keep your eyes open and your opinions minimal. She did not respond. There was nothing to say that would change minds already closed. Instead, she widened her scan, searching for other anomalies, other signs that something was wrong. The village itself bothered her now. She had operated in dozens of Afghan communities over her deployments. She knew the rhythms of daily life, the sounds and movements that meant normalcy. Darwan was too quiet. The cooking fires burned, but no women gathered water from the central well. No children played in the dirt streets. No old men sat outside their homes watching the world pass by. The village felt held breath, a community waiting for something to happen. Main element, she tried again. Village activity pattern is abnormal. Recommend you hold at current position and observe before entry. This time Holt did not even bother responding. She watched through her scope as the team entered the village, moving toward the structure where the informant was supposed to be waiting. They reached the door, knocked in the prearranged pattern. The door opened, and they disappeared inside. For 3 minutes, nothing happened. Ketchy swept her scope across every rooftop, every window, every shadow that could conceal a threat. The figures in the western tree line had not moved. That bothered her more than if they had. Static observation meant discipline. Discipline meant training. Training meant these were not random insurgents. The SEAL team emerged with a thin man in local clothing between them. The informant. He moved willingly, no signs of coercion, which meant the extraction was proceeding as planned. They began moving toward the northern extraction route, the path that would take them to the helicopter pickup zone 4 kilometers away. That was when Ketchy saw the others. Not in the tree line now, but inside the village itself. Men emerging from buildings that should have been empty. Men with weapons held low against their bodies, moving to cut off the extraction route. She counted 8, then 12, then more appearing from alleys and doorways like insects swarming from a disturbed nest. Contact! She barked into her radio. Multiple armed hostiles emerging from village structures. You're being flanked from the south and east. I count 15 plus and climbing. Get out now. For one terrible second, nothing happened. Then the valley exploded into chaos. The first RPG streaked across the morning sky and detonated against a wall 3 meters from the SEAL team. The informant went down, his body crumpling like a puppet with cut strings. Return fire erupted from both sides, the sharp crack of American rifles answered by the deeper chatter of PKM machine guns and the scattered pops of AK-47s. Nkechi was already firing. Her first round took an RPG gunner through the chest as he prepared a second shot. Her second dropped a machine gunner who had been setting up a crossfire position. Third and fourth eliminated 2 fighters advancing on the team's flank. But there were too many, and they were too spread out, and the team was caught in the open with nowhere to go. She heard Holt screaming for positions, heard the wet sound of rounds impacting flesh, heard someone calling for a medic in a voice that cracked with pain. Through her scope, she watched 2 SEALs go down, one clutching his leg, another not moving at all. The ambush had been perfect, and they had walked directly into it. The valley had become a kill box. Nkechi understood this with the cold clarity that combat forced upon the mind, stripping away everything except the geometry of survival. The SEAL team had taken cover behind a low stone wall that offered protection from direct fire, but left them pinned, unable to move forward or retreat without exposing themselves to the converging enemy positions. She worked her rifle with mechanical precision. Breath control, trigger squeeze, follow through. A fighter positioning an RPG went down. Another manning a PKM slumped over his weapon. But for every target she eliminated, 2 more seemed to take their place. The enemy had numbers and position and the terrible advantage of a perfectly executed ambush. Whisper to main element, she transmitted between shots. Count 19 hostiles and climbing. They are establishing a 3-sided box. Your only clear route is north toward the extraction point, but they are moving to cut that off. Holt's voice came back ragged, stripped of its earlier arrogance. Copy Whisper. We have 2 down, 1 Kia, 1 wounded. Murdoch took a round to the shoulder. We cannot move without suppression. Nkechi shifted her position slightly, acquiring a new target. A squad leader, by the look of him, directing fighters with hand signals from behind a mud brick wall. She took the shot and watched him fall. The fighters he had been directing scattered momentarily, confused without leadership, but another man stepped forward within seconds to take his place. That was the problem. These were not random insurgents firing wildly and hoping to get lucky. These were trained fighters executing a rehearsed battle plan. Someone had known the SEALs were coming. Someone had prepared this welcome. I am relocating, she announced. Current position too far for effective suppression. Moving to secondary overwatch. Negative Whisper, Holt barked. Stay in position. We need your eyes up high. Your eyes up high cannot save you if I cannot engage fast enough to matter. I am moving. Cover your sectors. I will be offline for approximately 8 minutes. She did not wait for his response. In the brutal calculus of combat, time spent arguing was time spent dying. She broke down her rifle with practiced speed, secured it across her back, and began descending from the ridge toward a secondary position she had identified during her initial scan. Closer to the fight, more exposed, but close enough to make a difference. The terrain was treacherous, loose rock and steep grades that threatened to send her tumbling with every step. She moved as fast as safety allowed, her breath coming hard, her legs burning with the effort. Behind her, the sounds of the firefight continued, the rhythm of violence that had become the soundtrack of her adult life. Halfway to her new position, she encountered the first sign that the enemy perimeter extended further than she had calculated. 2 fighters moving through a dry stream bed, flanking wide to cut off any American retreat. They had not seen her yet. They were focused on their objective, moving with the confidence of men who believed they held every advantage. Nkechi dropped into a crouch behind a boulder, her sidearm already in her hand. The rifle was too unwieldy for close quarters, but her Glock was an extension of her arm after thousands of hours of training. She waited until the fighters were within 15 meters, too close to miss, too close for them to react. 2 shots, 2 bodies. She did not pause to confirm the kills. There was no time. She continued moving, her senses hyper-alert now, scanning every shadow for additional threats. The stream bed the fighters had been using was a natural avenue of approach. If 2 had come this way, others might follow. She needed to reach her position before the noose tightened completely. The radio crackled with fragments of chaos. Reloading, someone shouted. Kadir, cover left. Where's that fire coming from? The voices blurred together into a tapestry of desperation that she had heard too many times before on too many battlefields. Main element, she transmitted, slightly winded. 2 hostile flankers neutralized in streambed grid reference 479er. Expect additional enemy movement along that axis. I am 2 minutes from secondary position. Copy whisper. Holt's voice had changed again, the hostility replaced by something that sounded almost like grudging respect. Hurry. She reached her new position as the sun climbed higher, spilling golden light across a valley that had become a grave for the informant and at least one American operator. The secondary overwatch was a cluster of rocks on a small rise, barely 300 meters from the enemy's rear elements. Close enough to hear their voices. Close enough to smell the cordite and the copper tang of blood on the morning air. Nkechi settled into position and brought her rifle up. Through the thermal scope, the battlefield resolved into terrible clarity. The SEAL team huddled behind their stone wall, heat signatures bright against the cool earth. The enemy fighters surrounding them, 19 now by her count, with more possibly held in reserve, and threading between the combatants like gray fingers reaching down from the mountains, the first tendrils of fog. She had known it would come. The Khyner province was famous for its sudden weather shifts. The way mist could roll through the valleys and reduce visibility to nothing within minutes. Most soldiers feared the fog. It stole your sight, your certainty, your ability to distinguish friend from foe. Nkechi did not fear it. She had trained for it. Her thermal scope cut through moisture and darkness alike, painting heat signatures in stark relief regardless of visual conditions. What blinded others would become her advantage. But not yet. The fog was still thin, still forming. She had work to do while she could still see. She began firing. Methodical, precise. Each shot carefully placed to maximize damage to the enemy's command structure and heavy weapons. A machine gunner fell, then his replacement, then the fighter trying to drag the PKM to a new position. She was buying time, spending ammunition to purchase seconds and minutes that the team desperately needed. The enemy began to realize they were being hunted from a new direction. Return fire cracked past her position, rounds sparking off the rocks that sheltered her. They could not see her clearly, but they knew her approximate location now. She was no longer invisible. Whisper, Holt called. They are massing for an assault. I count at least 15 preparing to rush our position. If they close the distance, we are finished. Nkechi chambered another round and sighted on the largest cluster of fighters. She had 8 rounds remaining in this magazine. 8 chances to delay the inevitable. Copy, she said. I will buy you what time I can. The fog continued to build. The mathematics of the firefight were brutal and unforgiving. Nkechi understood numbers in a way that most people never would, the cold equations that determined who lived and who died in combat. The SEAL team had 7 operators, now reduced to 6 effective fighters with Murdoch's wounded shoulder limiting his accuracy. They had perhaps 12 magazines between them, maybe 15 minutes of sustained fire if they were disciplined about their shots. The enemy had at least 25 fighters by her latest count, with ammunition supplies that seemed inexhaustible and reinforcement routes that remained open despite her efforts to interdict them. Every minute that passed shifted the odds further against survival. She fired again, dropping a fighter who had been coordinating movements between 2 assault teams. The man fell and did not rise, but another immediately took his place. These insurgents had learned from years of fighting coalition forces. They understood that leadership was a target, and they had built redundancy into their command structure. Main element, she transmitted. Enemy reinforcements arriving from the southeast. I count 6 additional fighters moving to join the assault force. Total hostile strength now exceeds 30. The response was Holt breathing hard, the sound of a man who had been fighting for his life for nearly 20 minutes. Copy whisper. CaseVac request transmitted, but weather is grounding all aircraft. No air support available. No quick reaction force. We're on our own. On their own. 3 words that every soldier dreaded. The moment when the vast machinery of military support simply could not reach you in time. Nkechi had been in that situation before. In Helmand Province, when her spotter took a round through his throat, and she spent 11 hours alone on a ridgeline waiting for extraction that kept getting delayed. She had survived that. She would survive this. The question was whether the men below her would. She shifted her scope to assess the team's position. Reinhold was working on one of the wounded, his hands red with blood that looked black through the thermal imaging. Kadir had taken up a forward position, his rifle steady despite what must have been exhaustion and fear. Even Murdoch was still fighting, his left arm hanging useless while his right hand worked his weapon with desperate efficiency. And Holt, the senior chief, had positioned himself at the most exposed point of the perimeter, drawing fire away from his wounded men, leading from the front in a way that contradicted everything his earlier arrogance had suggested. Whatever his failings, the man was not a coward. Nkechi made a decision. She keyed her radio and spoke with a calm she did not entirely feel. Main element, I am advancing to close support range. Current position insufficient to suppress assault force. Prepare to shift fire on my mark. Whisper that is suicide. Holt's voice cracked with something that might have been concern. You will be inside their perimeter. If they spot you, there is no cover. Then I will not let them spot me. Stand by. She broke down her position and began moving again, this time directly toward the enemy lines. It was insane by any conventional tactical measure. A lone sniper advancing into the teeth of a numerically superior force violated every principle she had been taught. But conventional tactics assumed conventional circumstances, and there was nothing conventional about this situation. The fog helped. It had thickened considerably in the past few minutes, reducing visibility to perhaps 100 meters for anyone relying on natural sight. For Nkechi, with her thermal scope, the world remained clear. Heat signatures blazed through the gray, curtain-like beacons, revealing positions that the fog concealed from everyone else. She moved through the mist like a ghost, her footsteps silent on the rocky ground, her breathing controlled despite the physical exertion. 50 meters from the enemy's rear elements, then 40, then 30. Close enough to hear them speaking in Pashto, close enough to smell the sweat and gunpowder that clung to their clothing. They were preparing for the final assault. She could see it in their positioning, the way squad leaders were arranging their men into assault formations. They would rush the American position from 3 directions simultaneously, overwhelming the defenders through sheer numbers. It was a tactic that would cost them casualties but guarantee victory, unless she changed the equation. Nkechi found a position behind a low outcropping of rock, barely adequate cover but sufficient for what she needed. She was now inside the enemy perimeter, surrounded by fighters who had no idea she was among them. One mistake, one sound, one moment of bad luck would mean her death. She steadied her rifle and began identifying priority targets. The machine gun teams first, then the RPG gunners, then the squad leaders directing the assault. If she could eliminate their heavy weapons and command structure in the opening seconds, the attack would falter. Maybe long enough for the team to reposition. Maybe long enough for the weather to break and air support to arrive. Maybe long enough for a miracle. Through her scope, she watched a fighter adjusting his PKM, preparing to lay suppressive fire for the assault. Beside him, another man loaded an RPG launcher with careful hands. A third stood slightly apart, speaking into a radio, coordinating with elements she could not see. 3 targets, 3 shots, 3 seconds to change everything or die trying. Nkechi drew a slow breath and let out halfway. Her heart rate dropped as years of training took over, her body becoming an instrument of absolute precision. The fog swirled around her, thick and cold, hiding her from eyes that could not see what she saw. Whisper to main element, she said softly. Engaging in 3 seconds. When you hear my first shot, assault north. Break through their line and move to extraction. Do not stop for anything. Holt's response was barely a whisper. Copy whisper. And Sergeant. Thank you. She did not acknowledge. There was nothing left to say. One breath. 2 targets acquired. The fog continued to thicken, wrapping the valley in a shroud of gray that would become either her salvation or her tomb. The fog had become a living thing, rolling through the valley in waves that swallowed sound and light alike. Visibility dropped to mere meters for anyone relying on natural vision. The enemy fighters moved through the gray murk like shadows, their confidence built on numbers and position and the certainty that they held every advantage. They could not see Nkechi. They could not know that death had slipped inside their perimeter and was watching them through eyes that cut through the fog like it was not there. She counted heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. Her first shot took the PKM gunner through the base of his skull. He dropped without a sound, his body folding over the machine gun he had been preparing to use. Before the echo of a shot had finished bouncing off the valley walls, she had shifted to her second target. The RPG loader looked up at the sound, confusion on his face, and her round caught him center mass. He staggered backward and fell against the rocks, the unfired rocket rolling from his hands. The radio operator was already moving, survival instincts screaming at him to find cover. Her third shot caught him mid-stride, spinning him sideways before he collapsed in a heap of limbs and equipment. 3 seconds, 3 targets, 3 kills. Then the valley erupted. The SEAL team burst from their position on her signal, pouring fire into the enemy's northern flank as they pushed toward the extraction route. Holt led the charge, his rifle barking in controlled bursts that dropped fighters who had turned to face the unexpected threat from behind. Kadir moved at his shoulder, covering sectors with the precision of a man who had trained for exactly this kind of desperate breakout. The enemy was caught between 2 fires now. Nkechi from behind, the SEALs from the front, and the fog reducing their ability to coordinate a response. Chaos rippled through their ranks as fighters tried to understand what was happening, where the attacks were coming from, who was giving orders now that their command structure had been decapitated. Nkechi kept firing, a fighter emerging from behind a boulder. Down. Another raising his weapon toward the fleeing Americans. Down. A third trying to rally his comrades with shouted commands. Down. She was moving between shots now, never staying in one position long enough to be targeted. The fog was her ally and her armor, concealing her movements while her thermal scope revealed everything she needed to see. Heat signatures blazed through the gray curtain, and each one that carried a weapon became a target. The SEALs had broken through the northern line. She could see them moving toward the extraction point, carrying their wounded between them, laying down suppressive fire as they went. They were going to make it. The impossible was becoming possible because she had changed the mathematics of the engagement. But the enemy was adapting. Surviving squad leaders were pulling their men back, consolidating their forces, trying to reestablish command and control. They had lost perhaps a dozen fighters in the initial chaos, but they still outnumbered the Americans significantly. And they were angry now, the cold fury of men who had seen their comrades cut down by an enemy they could not find. Whisper. Holt's voice came through the radio, strained but steady. We are clear of the immediate engagement zone. What is your status? Nkechi fired again, dropping a fighter who had been tracking the American retreat. Still engaged. Multiple hostiles remaining. Continue to extraction point. I will cover your withdrawal. Negative. We are not leaving you behind. You are not leaving me behind. You are following orders. Get your men to safety. I will exfiltrate when the route is clear. The argument might have continued, but a burst of automatic fire ripped through the rocks near her position, showering her with stone fragments. Someone had spotted her muzzle flash. The fog concealed her body, but it could not hide the brief tongue of flame that accompanied each shot. She rolled to a new position, putting a large boulder between herself and the direction of the incoming fire. Through her scope, she could see fighters converging on her last known location, at least 8 of them moving with the coordinated precision of a hunting pack. They might not know exactly where she was, but they knew she was close, and they were determined to find her. Contact, she transmitted. 8+ hostiles closing on my position, continuing to engage. She dropped 2 of them before they could reach cover. A third went down clutching his leg, screaming in Pashto as he tried to drag himself behind a rock. The others scattered, finally understanding that advancing toward her was suicide, but unwilling to retreat while she remained a threat. A standoff. She could not move without exposing herself. They could not advance without dying. And somewhere in the fog, more fighters were surely moving to surround her position. Her ammunition was running low. She had started the engagement with 60 rounds. She was down to perhaps 20 now, each one precious, each one potentially the difference between survival and death. The fog continued to swirl around her, thick and cold and indifferent to the violence it concealed. Somewhere to the north, the SEAL team was still moving toward extraction. That was what mattered. That was why she had done this. She steadied her breathing and waited for the next target to reveal itself. The enemy was out there, hunting her through the mist. But they were hunting blind, and she could see everything. The hunters became the hunted in the space between heartbeats. Nkechi understood the shift the moment it happened, the way predators recognize when prey has turned dangerous. The fighters who had been advancing on her position were now pressed against whatever cover they could find, afraid to move, afraid to expose themselves to the ghost in the fog who had already killed so many of their brothers. She used their fear. While they cowered, she repositioned, sliding through the mist like smoke through fingers. 20 meters to the east, then north, circling around the cluster of fighters who thought they had her pinned. Her movements were silent, each footstep placed with the care of someone who understood that sound traveled strangely in fog, and a single snapped twig could mean death. Through her thermal scope, she watched them. 6 remaining from the group that had converged on her position. They were speaking in hushed voices, arguing about what to do. One wanted to rush her position with overwhelming force. Another counseled patience, waiting for reinforcements. A third suggested retreat, pulling back to regroup with the main force. None of them knew she was now behind them. She took the one who wanted to rush her first. The shot was clean, entering below his left ear and exiting through his right temple. Before his body hit the ground, she had shifted to the second target, the one counseling patience. He died, never knowing that patience had run out. The remaining 4 scattered like startled birds, firing wildly into the fog in every direction. One of them actually shot toward their own lines, so disoriented that he could no longer tell friend from foe. Nkechi let them panic, let them waste ammunition on shadows, let the fear do her work for her. When the firing stopped, she picked off 2 more. The survivors broke completely then, abandoning their weapons and fleeing into the fog. She let them go. They were no longer threats, and she had limited ammunition remaining. Every round had to count. Whisper to main element. 6 hostiles neutralized in my position. Remaining enemy forces in disarray. What is your status? The response took a moment, and when it came, Holt's voice carried a note she had never heard from him before. Something that sounded almost like awe. Main element is 800 meters from extraction point. We have visual on the LZ. No enemy contact in the past 3 minutes. Whisper, what is happening back there? I'm doing my job, Senior Chief. She began moving again, angling northwest to parallel the SEAL team's retreat. The fog was still thick, but patches were beginning to thin as the morning sun climbed higher. Her advantage would not last forever. She needed to ensure the team reached extraction before visibility returned and the surviving enemy forces could reorganize. A sound to her left. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving fast. She dropped into a crouch and brought her rifle up, scanning through the thermal scope. A squad of fighters was moving perpendicular to her position, not hunting her, but racing to cut off the American retreat. They had figured out where the SEALs were heading and were trying to get there first. Nkechi did the math in her head. 8 fighters, 14 rounds remaining. If she engaged from this position, she could drop perhaps half of them before they found cover. But the other half would reach the extraction point before the team, and a firefight at the LZ would be catastrophic. She needed to stop all of them, and she needed to do it now. The decision was made before she consciously formed it. She rose from her crouch and sprinted through the fog on an intercept course, her boots pounding against the rocky ground, abandoning stealth for speed. The fighters heard her coming. They turned, weapons rising, searching for the source of the sound. She shot the first one while still running. The second. The third. Then she was among them, too close for the rifle, transitioning to her sidearm with a fluid motion of 10,000 practice repetitions. A fighter loomed out of the fog directly in front of her, and she put 2 rounds into his chest before he could bring his weapon to bear. Another grabbed at her from the side, and she pivoted, driving her elbow into his throat before finishing him with a shot to the head. The remaining 3 tried to flee. She dropped 2 of them before they made it 10 meters. The last one vanished into the fog, and she let him go. He was running in the wrong direction, away from the extraction point, away from any position where he could threaten the team. Nkechi stood in the aftermath, her breath coming hard, her hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. 8 bodies lay scattered around her in a rough circle. Men who had been alive 30 seconds ago. Men who had family somewhere. Men who had made the choice to pick up weapons and fight. She felt nothing. She would feel it later, she knew. The weight of what she had done would settle on her shoulders in the quiet hours, the faces visiting her dreams, as they always did. But not now. Now there was only the mission. She checked her ammunition. 6 rounds remaining in her sidearm. For her rifle. 10 chances to make a difference if more threats emerged. Main element, she transmitted, her voice betraying none of the exertion that burned in her lungs. 8 additional hostiles neutralized. Your extraction route should be clear. Confirm when you reach the LZ. The radio was silent for a long moment. Then Kadir's voice, younger and less controlled than Holt's, filled with something that sounded like disbelief. Whisper, we are at the LZ. No enemy contact. How many hostiles have you engaged? Nkechi looked at the bodies around her, then back along the path she had traveled through the fog. She had lost count somewhere between the 3rd engagement and the 4th. Enough, she said simply. Get your wounded ready for extraction. I am coming to you. The fog began to lift as Nkechi moved toward the extraction point, thinning from an impenetrable wall into gauzy curtains that parted and reformed around her. The sun was burning through now, reclaiming the valley from the gray shroud that had concealed so much death. In 20 minutes, maybe 30, visibility would return to normal. The advantage that had kept her alive would evaporate like morning dew. She moved quickly but carefully, her senses straining for any sign of remaining threats. The enemy had been shattered, their command structure destroyed, their fighters scattered across the valley in 1s and 2s. But scattered did not mean defeated, and desperate men with weapons were dangerous regardless of their organization. A sound ahead. She froze, rifle rising, finger finding the trigger with automatic precision. Through the thinning fog, she could make out shapes, human forms moving toward her. Her thermal scope showed their heat signatures clearly, and she recognized the distinctive pattern of American combat gear before her conscious mind could process what her eyes were seeing. Whisper, hold fire. Holt's voice came through the radio a half-second before she would have engaged. Friendly element moving to your position. She lowered her rifle, but did not relax. What are you doing, Senior Chief? I told you to hold at the LZ. The shapes resolved into Holt and Kadir, both moving with weapons ready, scanning the fog for threats. Holt's face was streaked with dirt and someone else's blood, his eyes carrying the hollow look of a man who had stared death in the face and somehow survived. We are not leaving anyone behind, he said as they reached her. That includes you, Sergeant. The extraction point is secure. You should be preparing your wounded for transport, not conducting rescue operations for personnel who do not require rescue. Holt almost smiled. It was a strange expression on a face she had only seen twisted with contempt or tight with combat focus. You just single-handedly destroyed an ambush force that had U.S. dead to rights. Forgive me if I want to make sure you made it back. They moved together through the lifting fog, 3 soldiers bound by the strange intimacy that combat creates. Nkechi found herself walking between the 2 men, Holt on her left, Kadir on her right, their weapons covering different sectors as they advanced. It was the formation of equals, of teammates who trusted each other with their lives. How many? Kadir asked quietly. His shoulder wound had been hastily bandaged, blood seeping through the gauze, but he moved without complaint. Nkechi did not answer immediately. She was calculating, running through the engagements in her mind, counting bodies that she had seen fall. The number that emerged surprised even her. 19 confirmed, she said finally. Possibly more. Some may have been wounded rather than killed. Kadir made a sound that was half laugh, half exhale of disbelief. 19. In what? 30 minutes. 40. Closer to 25. The fog helped. The fog helped. Holt repeated her words like he was trying to understand a foreign language. Sergeant, I have been in special operations for 12 years. I have worked with the best shooters in the world. I have never seen anything like what you did today. She did not respond. Praise made her uncomfortable, always had. Her father had taught her that a warrior's worth was measured in results, not recognition. You did not seek applause for doing your duty. You simply did your duty and moved on to the next task. They reached the extraction point to find the rest of the team in defensive positions around a relatively flat clearing that could accommodate helicopter landing. Reinhold had the wounded stabilized, their injuries serious but survivable if they could get to a surgical facility within the hour. Murdoch sat against a rock, his wounded arm immobilized against his chest, his face pale from blood loss and shock. He looked up as Nkechi approached, and something shifted in his expression. The contempt that had defined his every interaction with her was gone, replaced by something she could not immediately identify. It took her a moment to recognize it as shame. The radio crackled with a transmission from base. Weather window opening. CaseVac inbound your position. ETA 15 minutes. Confirm LZ status. Holt keyed his response. LZ is secure. 3 urgent surgical, 2 wounded ambulatory. Be advised we have additional friendly element for extraction. Marine sniper attached to our unit. Copy that. Glad to hear you made it, Senior Chief. We were preparing for the worst. Nkechi found a position at the perimeter and began scanning the tree line. The fog was almost gone now, revealing the valley in the harsh clarity of morning light. Somewhere out there, surviving enemy fighters were regrouping, licking their wounds, trying to understand what had happened to their carefully planned ambush. She had given them a lesson they would not soon forget. The Americans were not soft targets. The Americans had guardians who emerged from the fog, like spirits of vengeance. The Americans had her. 15 minutes. She could hold a perimeter for 15 minutes in her sleep. The distant sound of helicopter rotors reached her ears, growing louder with each passing second. Rescue was coming. They were going to make it. She allowed herself a single moment of relief before returning her focus to the tree line. The mission was not over until everyone was safely aboard those aircraft. Until then, she would watch. She would wait. And if any threat emerged from that valley, she would end it. That was her job. That was her purpose. That was who she was. The helicopters appeared over the eastern ridge like angels of deliverance. 2 Black Hawks flying in formation with door gunners scanning the terrain below. Nkechi watched them approach while maintaining her position at the perimeter, her rifle still ready, her eyes still searching for threats that might emerge in these final vulnerable minutes. The first aircraft flared over the clearing, its rotor wash kicking up a storm of dust and debris that forced everyone to shield their eyes. It touched down with practiced precision, the crew chief already jumping out to assist with loading the wounded. The second helicopter held in an orbit overhead, providing cover, its door gunner tracking the tree line with his minigun. Go, Nkechi called to the team. Get the wounded aboard. I will cover. No one argued with her. Reinhold and Kadir carried the most severely wounded operator between them, moving in a crouched run toward the waiting aircraft. Holt followed with another casualty draped over his shoulders in a fireman's carry, the weight barely slowing him down. Murdoch stumbled along under his own power, his face gray but his legs still functioning. Nkechi swept her scope across the valley one final time. Movement caught her attention near the tree line, 300 meters out. She focused and saw 2 figures watching from the shadows, armed but not advancing. Survivors of the ambush force. She guessed, too few and too frightened to attempt another engagement. They were observing, perhaps reporting the extraction to whatever command structure remained. She could have taken them. The range was well within her capabilities, and they were stationary targets. But they posed no immediate threat, and she had killed enough today. She let them watch. Let them report what they had seen. Let the story spread through the insurgent networks of the Ghost and the Fog, who had destroyed an entire ambush force single-handedly. Fear was a weapon too. Whisper, the helicopter crew chief, called over the radio. First bird is loaded. You are on the second aircraft. Move to the LZ now. She rose from her position and began moving toward the clearing, walking backward to keep the tree line in view. The first Black Hawk was already lifting off, banking hard to the west as it climbed away from the valley. The second aircraft descended to take its place, the rotor wash hitting Ketchy like a warm hurricane as she approached. Hands reached down to help her aboard. She grabbed the offered grip and hauled herself into the cabin, her rifle clutched against her chest, her legs suddenly weak as the adrenaline that had sustained her began to fade. She collapsed onto the metal deck of the helicopter and felt the aircraft lurch beneath her as the pilot pulled pitch and climbed for altitude. The valley fell away below them. Through the open door, and Ketchy could see the landscape she had fought through, the ridges and gullies and fog-shrouded killing grounds where 19 men had died. From up here, it looked almost peaceful, a pastoral scene of mountains and valleys that gave no hint of the violence that had occurred. Someone pressed a canteen into her hands. She looked up to find Holt sitting across from her, his own exhaustion evident in the slump of his shoulders and the lines etched around his eyes. He nodded toward the canteen. "Drink," he said, his voice barely audible over the roar of the rotors. "You earned it." She drank. The water was warm and tasted faintly of plastic, but it was the best thing she had ever experienced. She had not realized how thirsty she was until that moment. Her body so focused on survival that it had ignored every other need. The flight to FOB Chapman took 23 minutes. Ketchy spent most of it staring out the open door at the mountains passing below, her mind slowly processing the events of the morning. She had done what needed to be done. She had saved lives, taken lives, performed her duty with the excellence that her father had demanded and her training had enabled. But the weight was settling on her now. The faces of the men she had killed were beginning to form in her memory, assembling themselves from fragments of thermal imagery and muzzle flash glimpses. They would visit her dreams tonight. They would join the others who already waited there, the gallery of ghosts that every combat veteran carries. "Sergeant." Holt's voice cut through her thoughts. She looked up to find him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "For what it is worth, I am sorry. For how I treated you. For what I said. You deserve better." Ketchy held his gaze for a long moment. The apology was genuine. She could see that. Whatever else Brennan Holt might be, he was not a man who offered words he did not mean. The arrogance that had defined him was cracked now, perhaps permanently, broken against the reality of what she had demonstrated. "I did not do it to prove anything to you," she said finally. "I did it because it was my job, because your men needed help, because that is what warriors do." He nodded slowly, accepting her words. "I know. That is what makes it worse. You saved us without any expectation of recognition or gratitude. You saved us even though we did not deserve it." She turned back to the window, watching the FOB appear on the horizon, a cluster of buildings and barriers that represented safety and rest and the end of this particular nightmare. "Everyone deserves to make it home, Senior Chief, even people who have not earned it yet." The helicopter began its descent toward the landing pad, carrying its cargo of survivors toward whatever came next. The landing pad at FOB Chapman was crowded with personnel when the helicopters touched down. Medical teams rushed forward to receive the wounded, their movements urgent but controlled, the choreography of trauma response that separated military medicine from chaos. Ketchy stepped off the aircraft and moved out of the way, letting the professionals do their work. Word had already spread. She could see it in the faces of the soldiers and Marines who had gathered at the edge of the pad, the way they watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright awe. Radio traffic during the engagement had painted a picture that was now being filled in with details that passed from person to person, each retelling adding another layer to what was rapidly becoming legend. Lieutenant Commander Vance pushed through the crowd, her sharp eyes finding Nkechi immediately. She walked directly to the Marine sniper, ignoring everyone else, her face betraying nothing of what she might be feeling. "Sergeant Adiz," she said formally. "Report." Nkechi straightened despite her exhaustion. "Mission failed, Commander. The informant was killed in the initial ambush. Enemy forces were neutralized, but the primary objective was not achieved." Vance studied her for a long moment. "The primary objective," she said slowly, "was to extract the informant and bring our people home. You achieved half of that when by all rights you should have achieved none of it. Every member of the SEAL team is alive because of your actions today. 2 men died, Commander, the informant and Petty Officer Kendrick, and 5 more would have died without you. Perhaps all of them. Do not confuse perfection with success, Sergeant. In war, sometimes success means bringing home everyone you can." A commotion near the medical station drew their attention. Holt was arguing with a corpsman who wanted to examine a cut on his forehead, insisting that others needed attention more than he did. When he saw Vance watching, he abandoned the argument and walked over, his bearing somehow both exhausted and energized. "Commander," he said, his voice carrying clearly to the gathered crowd, "I need to make a formal statement for the record." Vance raised an eyebrow. "That can wait for the debrief, Senior Chief." "No, Commander, it cannot." Holt turned to face Nkechi directly, then raised his voice so everyone present could hear. "Before this mission, I expressed doubts about Sergeant Adiz's assignment to our team. I questioned her capabilities based on factors that had nothing to do with her skills or her record. I was wrong." The crowd had gone silent. Even the medical teams had paused their work, sensing that something significant was happening. Holt continued, his words measured but powerful. "Today, Gunnery Sergeant Adiz single-handedly engaged and neutralized 19 enemy combatants who had my team pinned in a kill zone. She did this after I ignored her tactical assessments that could have prevented the ambush entirely. She did this after I and members of my team treated her with disrespect that she did not deserve and did not return." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter but no less intense. "I have served with the best operators in the world. I have never, in 12 years of special operations, seen anyone do what she did today. Sergeant Adiz is not just a competent sniper. She is the finest combat marksman I have ever witnessed, and I am proud to have served alongside her." The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then someone in the crowd started clapping. Others joined in, the applause building until it washed over the landing pad like a wave. Nkechi stood rigid, uncomfortable with the attention, wishing she could disappear into the fog that had served her so well in the valley. Vance allowed the moment to continue for several seconds before raising her hand for quiet. "All right," she said. "Sergeant Adiz, you are relieved of duty for the next 12 hours. Eat something, get some sleep, and report to my office at 0800 tomorrow for a full debrief." "Yes, Commander." The crowd began to disperse, but the looks Nkechi received as people passed had changed. The skepticism and dismissal that had greeted her arrival at Chapman were gone, replaced by something else. Respect, recognition, the acknowledgement of worth that she had earned through actions rather than words. Kadir approached her as she walked toward the barracks, his wounded shoulder now properly bandaged and supported by a sling. He fell into step beside her, matching her pace. "You know," he said quietly, what halted back there took courage. Admitting he was wrong in front of everyone. That is not easy for a man like him. Nkechi nodded slowly. "I know. That is why I did not say anything. Sometimes people need to find their own way to the right place. Pushing them just makes them dig in deeper. My father taught me that." Kadir smiled slightly. He was an imam in Detroit. Spent his whole life helping people find their way without forcing them. Sounds like a wise man. He was. Still is actually. I should call him. Kadir paused outside the barracks entrance. "For what it is worth, Sergeant, I never doubted you. I read your file before the mission. I knew what you were capable of. Nkechi allowed herself a small smile. Thank you, petty officer. That means more than you know. She pushed through the door into the barracks, leaving behind the crowds and the accolades and the weight of expectation. Tomorrow there would be debriefs and reports and the bureaucratic machinery of military documentation. Tonight there was only exhaustion and the quiet sanctuary of a bunk where she could finally close her eyes. The ghosts would come, she knew. They always did. But she had learned to live with them, these silent witnesses to the cost of duty. They were the price of being what she was. The price of being good at the terrible things that war required. She lay down on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of the base settling into its evening routine. Somewhere out there, in a valley shrouded by the memory of fog, 19 men lay dead because she had pulled a trigger. Somewhere out there, 5 men lived because she had done the same. The mathematics of war. The equations of survival. She closed her eyes and let the darkness take her. The debrief lasted 4 hours. Nkechi sat in a windowless room at the Tactical Operations Center, walking through every moment of the engagement with a precision that left nothing to interpretation. Lieutenant Commander Vance led the questioning, flanked by intelligence officers who recorded every word, every tactical decision, every shot fired and target neutralized. She held nothing back. The warnings she had given that were ignored. The decision to relocate against orders. The close quarters engagements that had violated every principle of sniper doctrine. The final count that she had reconstructed through careful memory. 19 confirmed kills, 3 enemy prisoners taken when they surrendered, an unknown number of wounded who had escaped into the mountains. When it was over, Vance dismissed the intelligence officers and sat alone with Nkechi in the quiet room. The commander's face was unreadable, but her eyes held something that might have been admiration. You understand, Vance said slowly, that what you did out there was extraordinary. Not just the marksmanship, though that was remarkable enough. The decision-making, the tactical improvisation, the willingness to adapt when the plan fell apart. I did what the situation required, Commander. You did what 99% of operators would never have attempted, and you succeeded where most would have died. Vance leaned forward slightly. I am recommending you for the Navy Cross, Sergeant. Senior Chief Holt has already submitted his endorsement. Nkechi felt something shift in her chest, a complex emotion she could not immediately identify. The Navy Cross was the second highest decoration for valor that the Navy could award, surpassed only by the Medal of Honor. Marines fell under Navy jurisdiction for such awards, which meant Vance had the authority to initiate the recommendation. Commander, I was just doing my job. No. Vance shook her head firmly. You were doing far more than your job. Your job was to provide overwatch from a safe position. Instead, you infiltrated an enemy perimeter, engaged superior forces at close range, and single-handedly broke an ambush that should have killed an entire SEAL element. That is not duty, Sergeant. That is heroism. The word sat uncomfortably on Nkechi's shoulders. She had never thought of herself as a hero. Heroes were people in stories, larger-than-life figures who performed impossible deeds. She was just a Marine who happened to be very good at a very specific skill set. The recommendation will take time to process, Vance continued. Months, probably. These things move slowly through the bureaucracy. But I want you to know that what you did will be recognized, officially and permanently. Thank you, Commander. Vance stood, signaling that the debrief was concluded. One more thing, Sergeant. I have received a request from JSOC to have you permanently assigned to Special Operations Support. Apparently, word of your performance has reached some very senior officers who would like to keep you close. Nkechi rose as well, her body stiff from hours of sitting. And what did you tell them, Commander? I told them the decision was yours. You have earned the right to choose your next assignment. If you want to stay in this theater, supporting teams like Holt's, I will make it happen. If you want to return to the Marine Corps and continue your career there, I will support that as well. The choice hung in the air between them. Nkechi thought about the past 24 hours, the contempt she had faced, the battle she had fought, the respect she had earned. She thought about Kadir and his quiet faith, about Holt and his public admission of failure, about Murdoch and his shame that might or might not lead to genuine change. She thought about the 19 men who would never go home to their families and the 5 Americans who would. I need time to consider, Commander. Take whatever time you need. Vance moved toward the door, then paused. For what it is worth, Sergeant, I hope you stay. People like you are rare. The special operations community needs more examples of excellence that challenge assumptions. She left without waiting for a response, leaving Ketchy alone in the quiet room with her thoughts and her decision. The base had changed in the hours since her debrief began. Word had spread further, the story growing with each retelling until it had taken on the quality of myth. The Marine sniper who emerged from the fog. The woman who killed 19 fighters in half an hour. The ghost of Kiener Province. Ketchy walked through the compound and felt the weight of every glance. Some were admiring. Some were skeptical, people who could not quite believe the stories they had heard. Some were resentful, operators who had spent years building reputations that she had eclipsed in a single morning. She ignored them all. Reputation was noise. Results were what mattered. She found herself at the memorial wall, a stretch of plywood covered with photographs of coalition personnel killed in action. The newest additions were 2 faces she recognized. Petty Officer 3rd Class William Kendrick, killed in the initial ambush, and the informant whose name she had never learned. They stared out at her from their photographs, frozen forever in moments before everything went wrong. She stood before them for a long time, paying her respects in the only way she knew how. Silent, present, acknowledging the cost. A voice behind her broke the stillness. I thought I might find you here. She turned to find Holtz standing a few meters away, his expression uncertain, like a man approaching territory he did not know how to navigate. Senior Chief. Sergeant. He moved to stand beside her, his eyes finding the photographs on the wall. Kendrick was a good operator. Young but talented. He would have had a hell of a career. I am sorry I could not save him. You could not have saved everyone. Holt's voice was quiet, reflective. Even you have limits. The fact that you saved the rest of us is more than anyone could have expected. They stood together in silence, 2 warriors paying tribute to the fallen. The animosity that had defined their relationship was gone now, burned away in the crucible of combat. What remained was something more complicated. Respect, certainly. Perhaps even the beginning of understanding. I meant what I said yesterday, Holt offered finally. About being wrong. About you being the finest marksman I have ever seen. I know you did, and I meant the apology. I was an ass. A prejudiced, arrogant ass who almost got his team killed because he could not see past his own assumptions. Ketchy turned to face him directly. Yes, you were. But you also led your men through hell and got them to the extraction point. You also stood in front of everyone and admitted your failure. That takes a different kind of courage, Senior Chief. The kind that matters more in the long run. Holt absorbed her words, his jaw tightening with emotion he was clearly struggling to contain. So where do we go from here? She looked back at the memorial wall, at the faces of the dead, at the cost of the choices they had all made. Forward, she said simply. We go forward. We learn from what happened. We do better next time. And if there's a next time, and you are there, I will listen when you tell me something is wrong. That is all I ever wanted, Senior Chief. To be heard, to be trusted, to be allowed to do my job. He nodded slowly, a silent promise passing between them. Then he turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the dead and the weight of all she had done to keep others from joining them. 3 days passed before Murdoch found the courage to approach her. Ketchy was at the range, running through her maintenance routine, when she heard footsteps behind her and turned to find him standing at an awkward distance, his wounded arm still bound against his chest. He looked diminished somehow, smaller than the swaggering figure who had suggested she should make coffee while real operators worked. The arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. Sergeant, he said, his voice barely above a murmur. Do you have a minute? Ketchy set down her cleaning rod and gave him her full attention. Petty Officer Murdoch. He shifted his weight, unable to meet her eyes. I wanted to. That is, I need to. He stopped, started again, the words coming out in fragments. I am sorry. For what I said. For how I acted. For all of it. She studied him in silence, reading the tension in his shoulders, the shame in his downcast gaze. Unlike Holt's apology, which had carried the weight of genuine transformation, Murdoch's felt incomplete. He was sorry because he had been proven wrong, not because he understood why he had been wrong in the first place. Why, she asked simply. Why what? Why are you sorry? Because I saved your life, or because you realized your assumptions were incorrect. The question seemed to catch him off guard. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. I do not. I mean, both, I guess. I do not know. Nkechi nodded slowly. That is honest, at least. Most people who apologize know exactly what they are supposed to say without understanding what they are supposed to mean. She picked up her cleaning rod again, returning her attention to her rifle. I accept your apology, petty officer. But acceptance does not mean everything is resolved. What do you mean? I mean that an apology is a starting point, not an ending. You treated me with contempt because I am a woman. You assumed I was incompetent because I do not look like what you think a warrior should look like. Those assumptions did not appear overnight, and they will not disappear because of one mission. Murdoch flinched as if she had struck him. So what am I supposed to do? Better. She met his eyes directly now, her gaze steady and unflinching. You're supposed to do better. Not for me. For the next woman who crosses your path. For the next person who does not fit your expectations. You're supposed to remember this moment and let it change how you see the world. He stood there for a long moment, processing her words. Then he nodded once, sharply, and walked away without another word. Nkechi watched him go, uncertain whether anything she had said would take root. Some people learn from their mistakes. Others simply learn to hide them better. Time would tell which category Murdoch fell into. Later that afternoon, Kadir found her in the mess hall, sliding into the seat across from her with a tray of food that looked marginally better than the standard fare. Heard Murdoch came to see you, he said, keeping his voice low. How'd that go? About as well as expected. He is sorry because he has to be, not because he understands why he should be. Kadir nodded, unsurprised. Some people need longer to find their way. My father always said that change happens in its own time, and pushing too hard just creates resistance. Your father sounds like he has a lot of wisdom. He does. Kadir smiled slightly. He also says that the best way to change minds is to live your truth so clearly that others cannot ignore it. I think you did that out there in the valley. Nkechi considered his words while she ate. Living her truth. It was an interesting way to frame what she had done. She had not set out to change anyone's mind or prove any point. She had simply done what needed to be done, the same as she had always done. But perhaps that was exactly what Kadir's father meant. Perhaps the most powerful statements were the ones you made without trying to make them. I've been thinking about the commander's offer, she said, changing the subject. The permanent assignment to special operations. And I'm going to decline. Kadir raised an eyebrow, but did not seem surprised. Can I ask why? Because this is not where I belong. She gestured vaguely at the base around them. I am a Marine. My place is with the Corps, training the next generation of scout snipers. Teaching them what I know so they can do what I do. Even after everything that happened here. The recognition, the respect. Especially after everything that happened here. Nkechi set down her fork and met his gaze directly. What I did in that valley should not be extraordinary. It should be standard. Every sniper should be capable of what I did, regardless of their gender or background. The only way that happens is if people like me go back and train them. Kadir was quiet for a moment, absorbing her reasoning. Then he smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious features. You know, when I first read your file, I thought you were impressive. Now I think you might be the most impressive person I have ever met. And not because of the shooting. Why then? Because you could stay here and be a legend. You could have a career that most operators dream about. Instead, you're choosing to go back and make more legends. That takes a different kind of courage, or a different kind of stubbornness. He laughed, the sound carrying across the nearly empty mess hall. Maybe both. They finished their meal in companionable silence. Two people who had found unexpected connection in the aftermath of violence. When they parted ways at the door, Kadir extended his hand. It was an honor serving with you, Sergeant Adiz. Nkechi took his hand and shook it firmly. Likewise, Petty Officer Kadir. Take care of that shoulder. I will. And Sergeant. He hesitated, then continued. If you ever need anything, reach out. You have friends here now. She watched him walk away toward the barracks, his words settling into her chest like a warm ember. Friends. It was not something she had expected to find in this place, among these people who had started by dismissing her. But war had a way of forging bonds that peacetime could never create. Tomorrow she would tell Vance her decision. Tomorrow she would begin the process of returning to the Corps, to the ranges and classrooms where the next generation of snipers was being made. But tonight she would allow herself to appreciate what had been gained. Respect, recognition, and something that felt almost like belonging. 1 week after the Valley, Nkechi stood in Lieutenant Commander Vance's office and delivered her decision. The commander listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing until Nkechi had finished speaking. You're certain? Vance asked. This opportunity will not come again. JSOC does not make offers twice. I am certain, Commander. My place is with the Marine Corps, training snipers, building the next generation. Vance studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I expected as much. You're not the type to chase glory, Sergeant. You never were. She stood and extended her hand. It has been an honor having you under my command, even briefly. The Corps is lucky to have you back. Thank you, Commander, for everything. The paperwork for her transfer took 3 days to process. During that time, Nkechi found herself the subject of attention she neither sought nor wanted. Officers she had never met stopped her to shake her hand. Enlisted personnel pointed her out to each other in hushed tones. The story of the fog had spread beyond Chapman now, filtering through the special operations community like smoke through a screen. She endured it with quiet grace, deflecting praise, redirecting conversations, counting the hours until she could board a transport and leave this place behind. On her final morning at Chapman, a formation was called. Nkechi assumed it was routine, some administrative matter that required all hands present. She took her place among the assembled personnel and waited, her mind already turning toward the journey ahead. The base commander, Colonel Harrison Webb, stepped forward to address the formation. He was a lean man with silver hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in uniform. His voice carried easily across the assembled troops. Before we proceed with regular business, the colonel said, I want to take a moment to recognize extraordinary service. He paused, his eyes finding Nkechi in the crowd. Gunnery Sergeant Adiz, front and center. She felt every eye turn toward her as she walked to the front of the formation. The colonel waited until she had taken her position before continuing. 1 week ago, Gunnery Sergeant Adiz was attached to a SEAL element conducting a high-value target extraction. When that element was ambushed by superior enemy forces, she single-handedly engaged and neutralized 19 hostile combatants, breaking the ambush and enabling the survival of 5 American operators who would otherwise have been killed. The colonel's words hung in the morning air, stark and unadorned. Nkechi stood at attention, her face betraying nothing of the emotions churning beneath the surface. Her actions that day exemplified the highest traditions of military service. Courage under fire, tactical excellence, selfless dedication to the lives of her fellow service members. Colonel Webb turned to face her directly. While the formal recommendation for the Navy Cross works its way through channels, I wanted to ensure that everyone present understands what this Marine accomplished. And I wanted her to know that her service will not be forgotten. He stepped forward and extended his hand. Nkechi took it, feeling the firm grip of a man who had seen enough combat to understand exactly what she had done. Thank you, Sergeant, he said quietly, for the colonel's ears only, for bringing our people home. The formation was dismissed, but the crowd did not immediately disperse. Instead, a line formed in front of Nkechi as person after person stepped forward to offer their own thanks, their own recognition, their own acknowledgement of what she had accomplished. Holt was among them, his expression carrying a weight that words could not fully express. He shook her hand and held it for a moment longer than necessary. If you ever need anything, he said, anything at all, you know how to reach me. I do, Senior Chief. Take care of your team. I will. And I will make sure they remember who saved them. The story will not get twisted or forgotten. Not on my watch. Murdoch approached next, still awkward, still struggling with the complexity of his feelings. He managed a salute and a few mumbled words of thanks before retreating back into the crowd. It was not much, but it was something. Perhaps, in time, it would grow into something more. Kadir was last. He waited until the others had moved away before stepping forward, his arms still in its sling, his eyes bright with emotion he did not try to hide. "So this is goodbye," he said. "For now." Nkechi allowed herself a small smile. "But I have a feeling our paths will cross again." "I hope so." He pulled something from his pocket and pressed it into her hand. A challenge coin, she realized, bearing the insignia of his SEAL team. "My father gave me this when I completed BUD/S. He said it would protect me. I want you to have it. I cannot accept this. It is too important. You can, and you will." He closed her fingers around the coin. "You protected us when we could not protect ourselves. This is the least I can offer in return." She looked down at the coin in her hand, feeling its weight, understanding what it represented. A bond forged in blood and fog, and the desperate mathematics of survival. A friendship that had emerged from the most unlikely of circumstances. "Thank you, Yusuf." She used his first name deliberately, acknowledging the connection that had grown between them. "I will treasure it." The transport was waiting when she reached the airfield, its engines already spinning up for departure. She climbed aboard with her rifle case and her sea bag, taking a seat near the window where she could watch Chapman shrink away beneath her. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments about what resonated most with you. Maybe it was Nkechi's composure under fire, the transformation of those who doubted her, or perhaps you know someone in your own life who proved critics wrong through sheer excellence. The aircraft climbed through the morning sky, leaving behind the mountains and valleys where she had become something more than she had been before. Not a legend, despite what others might say. Just a Marine who had done her job when her job was the only thing standing between life and death. The fog that had hidden her would disperse. The stories would fade and change with time. But somewhere in the peaks of the Hindu Kush, the wind still carried whispers of the ghost who had emerged from the gray and erased an army in 30 seconds. And somewhere over the horizon, a new generation of snipers waited to learn from someone who could teach them that excellence knew no boundaries, no limitations, no predetermined shape. Nkechi Addiz was going home, and she was carrying the future with her.